You know, Joe, the question going forward then is, what do we do with this? How do we move forward with it? And I always believe in both parties' part, because it's, Republicans are blamed, oh, you want to just keep the guns out there and kill people. And then Republicans look at Democrats, say, you won't do anything about violent video games and movies. And we know that this shooter was very big on some pretty violent Xbox games. In fact, a couple of times his late mother had called him out to the house, was over the rage when he had those Xbox games taken away. So where does this go? Can both sides step back enough from their own, you know, stubborn positions to find middle ground?
Well, if history is our guide, then unfortunately the answer is probably no. I mean, if major gun legislation didn't happen in the wake of Newtown when Barack Obama was our president, you know, I don't see any major change in restriction on the Second Amendment coming now. That said, here you have a killer who checked every single box of being someone that probably shouldn't have had a firearm. The people around him made the responsible decision to reach out to those in charge. If this is a person who can get guns, I would be happy as a conservative. I used to have an A rating by the NRA. Still, I'm happy to tell anyone that this is a person we should find a way to restrict their access to firearms.
You know, then the privacy advocates say, be careful what you wish for, because then every time if either you or your child has visited the doctor for some psychological help or medications, then be careful.
No, absolutely. With every right, though, there is an obligation and there's a countervailing public safety concern. Here, this was an AR-15. He was 18, and under Florida law, he could get one. He couldn't get a handgun till he was 21, but he could walk into a gun store and get an AR-15. We should be thinking collectively, I think, about high-capacity magazines. We had an assault rifle ban for 10 years. It was until from 1994 to 2004.
And that's when Columbine happened, though, unfortunately, even under those circumstances.
I'm a mother, you're a parent with another one on the way. These children are moving us and stirring us. We have to think about, and I think politicians need to be sort of cognizant of the idea, what is the price
But
of
some of those
our
kids are upset, right, Cabot? You talk about the ones who post on social media. They've been told that if you say something or see something, say something, and they have, or colleagues have, or people who knew this kid did, and they feel it was dropped, so that we let them down.
And I think that as conservatives, as gun supporters, people need to do more to advocate for the Second Amendment, not just from the side of we don't care about people getting killed, but advocating for the positive reasons to have firearms in society. I'm on campus all the time with Leadership Institute's Campus Forum, talking to students about this. I had a video a couple months ago. Students told me they want to repeal the Second Amendment after a shooting. And I think that shows that a lot of students these days don't have a natural respect or natural appreciation for the Second Amendment, what it actually means to society beyond just guns. So I think there's a messaging problem that in the future, moving forward, a lot of young people these days, they view guns only as killing machines, as nothing more. And that's something that conservative supporters of the Second Amendment are going to have to get past and win the messaging battle moving forward, or it's not going to go well for gun advocates in the future. And
I talked to some high school students about 3 months ago, and they had the same questions. They said, why do we have a Second Amendment? Why couldn't we just repeal it? I think we should also have, a fair and frank discussion about other constitutional rights that people care a little bit less about. So the Third Amendment protects us against having soldiers quartered in our homes. Where is the money and where is the political advocacy around that? We have limits on rights. We have perjury laws. We have slander laws, we have libel laws.
I think the difference is, though, people who support the Second Amendment are afraid of having some sort of overarching collective punishment where everyone who is availing themselves of this constitutional right, which is no different from the constitutional right of free speech or of quartering or search and seizures, they don't want to see a collective punishment on everyone because some people fundamentally should not have firearms like Nicholas Cruz.
But then we have to find how far do we go. Anecdotally, the stories were out there on social media and elsewhere that, you know, Nicholas Cruz had problems. But because that were conveyed in an official sense to an institution that could stamp it in a file and let a gun shop owner know that this person had a record of mental issues, he got approved for that gun. So acquiring it legally and everything else. Are you comfortable with this sort of thing, even if there are run-ins with your school or whatever, or your child's school, where that enters, somehow gets to be on their file and permanently there on their file?
I think that's a very, very good question. And I think you always have to take this example and push it out to another to be intellectually honest about it. So I do have civil liberties concerns about this, but there has to be a way of doing this and doing this right. your point is well taken. You know, we think about what happened with San Bernardino and the idea of searching an iPhone or not. Do you force that as a Fourth Amendment issue because this person killed a lot of people, or do you not? So I don't have the answer, but if we're not talking about it...
Or you see a worrisome Snapchat video, a series of pictures or comments, and then beyond just that person's friends or those who saw that, conveying it to people, how far do you go?
And I think many Americans would prefer to have healthcare professionals making decisions about mental stability for students and not random school administrators.
Let's say the school in this case had already raised, as guidance counselor had raised concerns. Wouldn't that enter a file somewhere so that this kid walks in, or any kid walks into a gun store, and they say, no, apparently at your school you were expelled or whatever. How far does that info?
Yeah, and the important counterpoint there is how many Americans could feel a fear of going to a doctor because they say, well, I don't want people to find out about my mental history because then I go to a doctor, now I can't, I rights taken away from me. It could cause people not to do that. It's important to remember in this conversation, any conversation, not letting emotions get in the way, and also realizing the second you give the government power to take your rights away, they almost never come back.
See, that's the fear people legitimately
that.
have, that in the effort to try to stop this sort of thing, they create even bigger problems.
Well, sure. I mean, you know, we have a gun registry here in New York State, which when it was passed in 2013, the majority of people didn't even comply with it as is. I mean, the law had no teeth. But I think Marco Rubio is talking about something, to your point, where if friends, neighbors, and family want to bring an action against someone, I think he calls it a gun violence restraining order, you know, that's something that I think conservatives really should look at. Look at having a court grant the ability to remove guns from someone who there's evidence against, and they've had the opportunity to present evidence in their own defense of owning firearms.
So you have a due process piece, which is similar to what happens with domestic violence. So people who have been, who have had convictions for domestic violence are, you know, precluded from having firearms because of the threat to the people that they've been violent against in the past.
We might get the first indication of that on Wednesday. I think I misstated and called it on Thursday, when the president is going to be meeting with Florida teachers and students on this very subject. We don't know who they are and how many were protesting the president over the weekend, but it is supposed to be a pretty interesting group.